Hey everybody. Hey everyone, how you doing tonight? Welcome, welcome, welcome. So glad to be here with all of you. We're going to have a nice conversation tonight like we do every time that I do one of these streams. Glad you're here to join me. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell, and we will get rolling.
Of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Well, shout out to everyone. Welcome, welcome. And yes, all beverages will be forever unnamed. We have some unnamed water beverage right here. That is some good unnamed water beverage. And so glad to be with you all. So glad to be able to have this great conversation here with all of you. All good, all good. The world is constantly changing. As we all know, A does not equal A. And the world is constantly in a state of motion. And a lot of things are in flux. As I told you all, my life is in a little bit, of a strange up in the air place right now, but hopefully resolved shortly. And I thank you for all the support you've given me since I've been banned from PayPal and etc. Why was the Soviet Union unable to stop the nationalist color revolutions, the Warsaw Pact during the 80s? All right, writing it down. For those of you who don't know, the way we do things here is I give opening remarks. I give opening remarks, and then I do the roll call. And then after the opening remarks and after the roll call, I wrote it down already, I answer super chat questions for the rest of the night. That's how it works. That's how we roll. So if you have something you want me to talk about in the second half of the show, by all means, just send me a super chat and I will type it down. And in the second half of the show, I'll go through them. Boom, boom, boom. And I'll answer your super chat questions. That's how it works. So I appreciate that. And we're just going to keep doing what we're doing. Looks like tomorrow, I will be going on Revolutionary Blackout Network. They are having a 2-day anti-imperialist, I don't know what you want to call it, telethon or an anti-imperialist 2-day marathon stream. So tomorrow around 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I'll be on with Revolutionary Blackout Network. I'm very excited about that. They do great work. RBN are great folks. I really like the work that they do. So that'll be pretty cool. Sunday is May 1st, and I believe in evening time on Sunday is when I will do our patrons only stream for those that are part of our Patreon community. So if you're part of the Patreon community, by all means, look forward to a stream on Sunday, May 1st, International Workers' Day, the working class holiday. That's going to be pretty awesome. Yeah, so that's kind of what we've got going on in this world. And as I said the other night, I am banned from PayPal. Right? How much did Harry Haywood's ideas influence the Black liberationist movements of the 60s and 70s? Well, that's an interesting question. How much did Harry Haywood's ideas influence Black liberation movements in the 60s and 70s? That's an interesting question, and I'd be happy to answer that. I got banned from PayPal, so if you do want to send me a donation, the best way to do it is to either sign up on the Patreon or just send it to me directly over Zelle. And I'm putting my address. It's just calebmaupin@gmail.com if you want to help us out, and that's greatly appreciated. And we just keep going. We got a lot of stuff going on. So that's always appreciated. You know, there we go. So that's always appreciated. I do appreciate that. Is that true? Jimmy Dore is talking about me right now? Is that true? For real? Wow. Wow. I wish I could watch it, but here I am streaming. That's okay. I'm here to talk with all of you. I'll see it afterwards. You know, Jimmy Dore always posts his stuff. That's interesting information. I'm on the lips of a great man. I love Jimmy Dore. I absolutely love Jimmy Dore. Really glad to hear that. But I'm also glad to be here streaming with all of you because it's a great night. So, you know, I actually did want to mention, I did get some bad news today about someone that I would consider to be a friend. Someone that I would consider to be a friend. There's an Iranian filmmaker named Nader Talebzadeh. And, you know, I would consider him to be a friend. When I went to Iran for the first time in 2014, it was for a conference, an anti-imperialist conference called the New Horizon Conference. It was the New Horizon conference of independent filmmakers and independent thinkers. And it was a great conference. A lot of anti-imperialists. Medea Benjamin of Code Pink was there. Gareth Porter, the great anti-imperialist journalist, he was there. There were Black revolutionary activists that were there. There were you know, anti-imperialists from Europe that were there. It was a very important conference. And of course, I don't agree with everyone who was there on everything, but it was really an honor to be able to be there. We heard speakers from the Palestinian liberation movement. We heard prominent Iranian college professors and anti-imperialist activists and intellectuals. We heard prominent Islamic scholars. It was really a great conference. And for me, to be, you know, a guy from Ohio who went all the way to Iran, it was a big deal. And the director, the head of that conference, Nader Talebzadeh, he was an award-winning Iranian filmmaker, and he died today. I just got the word. I received a message that he is no longer with us. You know, and I mean, he was not a young man, and he did have cancer, and he was hospitalized for quite some time with cancer before he ultimately died. But he did pass away, and my condolences go out to his family. To his wife, his children, his relatives, to those who worked with him in Iran. He was really an amazing person. He was really, really an amazing, dynamic individual. And I got to spend time with him in Iran on several occasions. I went to the first New Horizon conference, and he made a point of spending time with me, and he interviewed me for his national TV program. It's broadcast all over Iran to millions of people, one of the most popular TV programs in Iran. And then from there, when I went back to Iran and I participated in the Red Crescent Society and their mission, to try and deliver aid to Yemen. When I came back to Iran after that, he spent some time with me. I got to spend some time with him. And then when I went back for another New Horizon conference, I also got to spend some time with Nader Talebzadeh. He was an anti-imperialist, if there ever was one. And the wild thing about Nader Talebzadeh was that he was going to Columbia University. He was an Iranian student who attended Ivy League school in the United States, Columbia University. And in Columbia University, he got involved with protests against the Shah and the Iranian, Shah, the U.S.-backed dictator who was oppressing the Iranian people. And he got involved with protests in the Iranian American community, exiles. There were a lot of Iranians who were protesting the fact that the USA was backing this brutal dictator, the Shah of Iran. And he got involved in those protests. And then the Islamic Revolution of Iran broke out in 1979. So he returned to Iran along with former U.S. Attorney General and someone else that I worked with, Ramsey Clark. He and Ramsey Clark went to Iran, and they were there, and they were in the streets for the revolution. And they were in Iran, and he was an Iranian student, and he was with Ramsey Clark, and the two of them were there amid the bloodiest days of the Islamic Revolution. And Ramsey Clark, I interviewed Ramsey Clark for Press TV and spoke with Ramsey Clark when I worked with him about his experience in Iran during the Iranian Revolution of 1979 and how people went out into the streets and risked their lives to bring down the brutal dictatorship backed by the United States. how people would go to the protests in burial garments because they expected to be killed. They expected to die because the Shah's troops would just gun people down in the streets. It would just gun people down in the streets. And so people were putting on their funeral, burial garbs and going out into the streets to protest against the Shah. Down with the Shah. The Shah is a puppet of the United States. The Shah is an agent of the Rockefellers. And they went out into the streets and were gunned down. And a lot of people died, but the Shah ultimately fell. And the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is an anti-imperialist revolutionary government, came into existence as so many people were there. And he was there, and he went back. He and Ramsey Clark went back to Iran together and were there at the center of the revolution. And I got to hear Nader Talebzadeh talk about this. Nader Talebzadeh also he participated in the Iraq-Iran War. And he was in the military during the Iraq-Iran War. He was a soldier in he stayed in Iran after the revolution, and he apparently breathed in some chemical weapons, and that affected his breathing and his health for the rest of his life. Some of the chemical weapons that the U.S. government gave to Saddam Hussein had an impact on him. And as a result of that, he suffered his whole life breathing problems and other things related to that. Why was Marx pro-Mexican-American War? All right, very good. Okay. Why was Marx pro-Mexican-American War? Good question. So he suffered, he suffered from that. It impacted his breathing and such. And during the Iraq-Iran War, Nader Talebzadeh, from my understanding, he started making films. He started working for Iranian television and making documentary films and doing television reporting and such. And he became a very famous film director. He made a film about the life of Jesus Christ from an Islamic Shia Muslim perspective. And the film was actually screened at the Vatican. And it won a lot of awards around the world, this film about the life of Jesus. He was a revolutionary if there ever was one. And, he had lived in the United States for quite some time. He spoke English very, very fluently. And he told me that, that one of the things that inspired him, was how Americans had turned against the Vietnam War. He said he remembered being in the United States, being an Iranian, and seeing, the protest movement in the United States against the Vietnam War had started out with just leftists, but pretty soon there were young guys from Ohio and Pennsylvania and military GIs from Middle America were throwing their medals back. And he said, and that's when they had to stop the Vietnam War. And I must say that, being able to engage with Nader Talebzadeh, being able to listen to him, being able to hear his insights, it was just a deeply, deeply impactful thing. When you're somebody from Middle America and you go from Ohio to New York City, which you never thought would happen, and then you're living in New York City and you're part of Occupy Wall Street, and then a couple years later, somehow you find yourself in the Islamic Republic of Iran, and you're in an anti-imperialist country with Islam as the religion, and you're, going to conferences and hearing anti-imperialists and anti-Zionists from all around the world speaking at these conferences. It's a big experience, and spending a lot of time with Nader when I was in Iran. I mean, it was quite meaningful for me. He made a point of spending time with me, talking to me. I got to listen to him. I got to hear his perspective on things. I can't do that now because that conference is now illegal. That conference that I went to in Iran, the New Horizon Conference, was outlawed by Donald Trump. It's a conference that happens every year in Iran for independent filmmakers and independent thinkers, the New Horizon Conference, and it's now illegal. I went to 2 of them, and then Donald Trump outlawed it. They claimed it's some kind of spy operation, which is ridiculous. There was no spying going on. It was a bunch of people sitting in a hotel listening to speeches. CBS News came and covered it. If it was a spy thing, they wouldn't have done that. That's ridiculous. And I got to spend a lot of time with Nader Talebzadeh, and he was just a deep, deep thinking, wise, spiritual man. I mean, he was a very, very devout Muslim. All right, we'll talk about May Day coming up. Just a very, very devout Shia Muslim and a very, very dedicated anti-imperialist. He's no longer with us. He died. he was a celebrity in Iran. His TV show in Iran was one of the most widely viewed TV programs, in the country. And the second, it was actually the third New Horizon conference, was the second one that I went to, was actually dedicated to the Black liberation struggle. And it was Black Lives Matter activists who attended. People from Oakland, California, that were leaders of the Black liberation movement, leaders of the Nation of Islam, that attended. There were some hip hop artists who attended, and it was a great conference dedicated to the Black freedom struggle. And it was Black liberation activists who were aligned with the Islamic Republic of Iran and drew inspiration from it. And there's a lot of stories I could tell about Nader Talebzadeh. I don't know quite where to begin. He was a great filmmaker, a great writer, a great speaker, and just a very kind-hearted man. And I remember that, when I was coming back from Yemen, when I was on the boat, I went on a boat in 2015 to go and try and deliver medical aid to Yemen. And that boat was not able to, dock because they bombed the port. And so I ended up going back to Iran. We got off the boat in Djibouti and then flew to Turkey and then to Tehran. And I was back in Iran, and he met me at the airport. He picked me up from the airport. He was the guy who picked me up, and I was riding around with him in his SUV. And many people don't realize this, but in Iran, the only type of car you can have that's not made in Iran, the only type that you can get is a BMW, because of the sanctions. The sanctions on Iran, they have two Iranian state-run, state-controlled oil or car companies that you can get your car from. And then the only imported cars in Iran are BMWs. And the price of a BMW is so heavily inflated by the sanctions. It's about 800%. It costs about 8 times the price of a BMW normally. And so, most Iranians have cars made in Iran. But then, some of the more wealthy people, like very successful film directors who have like nightly TV shows, those folks, they have a BMW. So I remember I got into his BMW. We're riding around Tehran and we're talking about everything. And we talked about a lot of things. And he told me about being in the United States during the Vietnam War. He told me about being in the United States during the Vietnam War, and how, it was really amazing to see so many Americans turn against the imperialists and start to support the Vietnamese. He talked about Jane Fonda and how amazing that was, that Jane Fonda had turned against the Vietnam War. And he talked to me about how it was that the Midwestern average Americans, people from small towns in Ohio had turned against the Vietnam War, thrown back their medals. And he was talking to me. He said, how can we get the Americans to support the people of Yemen? And how can we get the Americans to see that the Yemeni people are right in their struggle against Saudi Arabia, and that Saudi Arabia's war crimes are wrong? And how can we do that? And we had that conversation, and he was interested to hear my insights into it. And he wanted to hear, how can he said, do you think we could get some celebrity in the United States to go to Yemen? He said, I remember he said that, wouldn't it be great if we could get Susan Sarandon or Sean Penn to go to Yemen and just expose what the Saudis are doing, bombing schools and hospitals. And it was just, this guy was such an anti-imperialist. His whole life was fighting the imperialists. He'd gone to college in New York City. And then when his homeland had a revolution, he went back. They are a private company. They can do it. It sounds like, right. I don't know what that means. But anyway, he went back, and, and we had a lot of conversations. We had some wild conversations about all kinds of different topics. And I just, this guy was a revolutionary. He wasn't a Marxist. He definitely rejected Marxism. He was definitely a Muslim. He may have been a Marxist at one point in his life, but he was definitely a supporter of Khomeini and Khamenei and the Islamic Revolution. It's really sad to see that he has left us, and it's too bad that U.S. law prevented me. After I went to Iran in 2014, and then I went back in 2015, and then I went back again in 2015, and then I couldn't go back. Because of the sanctions. We all received notice, basically, that if we went to another New Horizon conference, all kinds of people had gone to these New Horizon conferences. Michael Maloof, He went to it. Sander Hicks, who's a prominent 9/11 truther, he had gone to it. Medea Benjamin, every single person that went to these conferences got notice that if you dare go back to the New Horizon Conference, we are going to charge you with aiding terrorism. And it was very scary. So I couldn't go back, to the New Horizon Conference. But being there and being able to spend time with Nader, was really an amazing experience. He was really quite a dynamic person. I'm trying to think of what I could share. One of the stories that he told me was that, he came to the United States. He came to the United States at one point when Ahmadinejad was coming to the United States. When Ahmadinejad was president of Iran, he came to the United States with Ahmadinejad for like the UN thing or something like that. He was part of the Iranian delegation to the United Nations there to like film Ahmadinejad. And he said they stopped him at the U.S. At the border, at the customs, and they took him in the back, and of course it's Iran, are you a terrorist? They gave him the whole rundown before they let him into the country. And one of the things they said to him was, they said, what do you think about how Ahmadinejad said that he wanted to wipe Israel off the map? And he said to the customs man, I think this is hilarious. He said to the U.S. customs guy, he said, Ahmadinejad didn't say that. He said, Khomeini said that, and we will wipe Israel off the map. That's what he said. And that shows, this guy was a revolutionary if there ever was one. And he was, pictures of Malcolm X everywhere. And this guy was, it was pretty wild. It was pretty wild. So, I'm a little tired today. So I feel like in memory of Nader Talebzadeh, because in Iran, he's a well-known person. He's a celebrity. He's a household name. The whole country is mourning his death right now. But here in the United States, people don't know who he is. And they should know who he is. And they should know that, a lot of his views, he certainly didn't like gay marriage, I'll tell you that much. And he certainly didn't approve of abortion. And he was definitely a devout Muslim. But he was a revolutionary in so many ways. He was a revolutionary. He was with the Palestinians. He was with the IRA. He was with Nelson Mandela. He was with the people of Yemen. And he was just such a dynamic individual. I have an interview. The first time I went to Iran, he interviewed me on Iranian state TV, on his TV program. So I thought I might show a little bit of that interview that I did on Nader Talebzadeh's TV show. So yeah, I'm gonna show some of that interview. It's on my YouTube channel. It's not like hidden, but I'm gonna just show it here on the stream. Some of my interview with Nader Talebzadeh that I did on Iranian television. It was watched by like 3 million people in Iran. It was me and another activist in the United States, a Muslim activist named Cyrus McGoldrick, and myself. We were interviewed by Nader Talebzadeh. And so this is, I'm just going to show it for a little bit. If we get sick of it, we can just start, doing the roll call and the Q&As. But I just wanted to show a little bit of the interview I did with Nader Talebzadeh the first time I was in Iran. There you go. This is it.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحیم. سلام عرض میکنم، شب شما بخیر. خیلی خوشبختم، افتخاری است و توفیقی است الهی که
Don't worry, it's in English, by the way.
چند
The
شب
part where I
رو
talk is in
خدمت
English.
شما مخاطبان عزیز باشیم. کنفرانس افق نو رو این چند روز داریم، دوشنبه و سه‌شنبه و چهارشنبه، و میهمانان محترمی از سرتاسر دنیا. کنفرانس افق نو، کنفرانس، حالا از زبون خودم بخوام ساده تر صحبت بکنم، منتقدین غربی که دیدنشون برای ما مفید هستش، کسانی که خودشون رو خرج کردن، نقدشون، صحبتشون، کلامشون تخصص.
I'll skip ahead here to when he's talking with us, because Yeah, you can't understand Farsi, most of the audience here. There's probably some Iranian or Farsi speakers watching, and I'm sorry, I'm going to have to skip because this is an English language channel.
گزارش 3 دقیقه از ایشون پخش خواهیم کرد که بینندگان بهتر بشناسن. Caleb, talk about yourself. Thank you for being in the program. Talk about yourself and why, what's going on in the New York scene? What do you have to contribute to our audience?
Well, New York City is the center of world Zionism. And as someone who has directly observed what's going on there, I can tell you this, that the Zionists and the imperialists and the bankers are currently plotting, as they have been for many decades, to overthrow the Islamic Republic of Iran. They would like to overthrow Iran. And if you look around the world, if you look at Syria right now, if you look at Libya right now, that's what's coming. If they were to succeed in overthrowing the Islamic Republic, they would bring chaos and death and destruction. And as someone living in the United States, I feel that I have a moral obligation to oppose and expose the crimes that my government is carrying out in my name. You know, there are millions of people in the U.S. who oppose what is being done by the government and oppose the continued support for the Israeli criminals. So I'm here, and I'm honored to be invited to the Islamic Republic of Iran to participate in a conference about imposing Zionism, opposing imperialism, and fighting for justice.
Okay.
من از شهر نیویورک هستم. همونطور که استحضار دارید، شهر نیویورک کانون صهیونیسم بین‌الملل هستش و در این شهر هست که صهیونیست‌ها، امپریالیست‌ها و بانکداران دور هم جمع شدن. دسیسه‌ای که الان اینها در کنار همدیگه دارن ترتیبش میدن این هست که برای سرنگونی جمهوری اسلامی ایران دارن تلاش میکنن و میخوان همون داستانی رو که بر سر سوریه دارن میخوان بیارن و برنامه‌ای که برای لیبی پیاده کردن برای ایران هم پیاده کنن و اگر این اتفاق رخ بده نتیجه اون چیزی نخواهد بود به غیر از هرج و مرج، ویرانی و کشتار. من احساس میکنم به عنوان یک آمریکایی این تعهد اخلاقی رو دارم که این فساد و مشکلاتی که مقامات دولتی آمریکا رو دارن فاش کنم. کارهایی که دارن به نام من به عنوان یک شهروند آمریکایی دارن انجام میدن. میلیون ها آمریکایی باید به استحضار داشته باشین که مخالف سیاست‌هایی هستن که دولت آمریکا داره دنبال اون هست و حمایت‌هایی که از جنایتکاران اسرائیلی داره. من مفتخر هستم که در این کنفرانس از من دعوت شده تا حضور داشته باشم و دیدگاه‌هامو به اشتراک بگذارم و از دیدگاه‌های دیگر استفاده کنم.
متشکرم. اگر موافق باشید اگه بشه زودتر این کلیپ رو پخش بکنید از حضور آقای کالب توی صحنه هم در رسانه‌های جمعی و هم در شهر نیویورک اینو با هم ببینیم. آماده هستش؟
He's from the Workers' World Party, joining us live from the States. Caleb, Washington has renewed what it calls a state of emergency regime with Tehran.
Iran has opened a hand of friendship and diplomacy to the United States, wanting to resolve the hostility between the two countries. But the response of the U.S. and Israel to Iran's call for peace and negotiations has been hostility, and that's what we're seeing with this, this building seizure, the attacks on the new UN ambassador. It's all rooted in hostility. When Iran has made clear it wants peace with the United States and with other countries around the world, the U.S. seems to be committed to hostility toward the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Right now in this city, hospitals are closing. Schools are closing. All kinds of resources that people in this city use to survive are being shut down. Well, what are they talking about doing? They're talking about a new war against Syria. How much money is every single one of these missiles going to cost? At least $1 million. That could be teachers. That could be nurses. That could be doctors. But instead, it's going to a war. Do we want that?
But this is coming at the same time the U.S. continues to fund Saudi Arabia, which is committing crimes against the people and continues to get U.S. funds. At the same time, the U.S. is funding the Egyptian military, which is repressing the movement that brought down Mubarak. The U.S. supports all kinds of tyrants all over the world that support its agenda and economically, benefit the ruling elite of the United States, the oil companies. Iran has made clear for the last several decades that it has absolutely no intention of developing nuclear weapons, that it only seeks to develop peaceful nuclear power, and it has abided by every single requirement of it with the International Atomic Energy Agency under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and yet this propaganda continues to go out, claiming that there's some kind of Iranian threat to world peace. Well, the reason that the United States, Israel, France, and countries like that are threatened by Iran is not because Iran is aggressive or anything like that. They're threatened because Iran seeks independent economics. The Iranian Revolution in 1979, the people of Iran rose up, they overthrew the Shah, who was a brutal US-backed dictator, and they began a course of independent economic development. The profits from Iranian oil go to the Iranian economy. They don't go to the bankers on Wall Street. They don't go to London Stock Exchange. They go to the people. They go to the Iranian economy, and they don't want independent economic development. And that's what the aggression against Iran is all about. And Iran has been more than accommodating. It's made clear it has no desire for aggression. When President Rouhani was at the United Nations, he made clear he was talking of a world against violence and extremism, making clear that Iran is not aggressive, Iran does not want violence, but it's clear that the Wall Street bankers and the corporations and the U.S. government, which represents them, is very, very committed to hostility toward Iran, and that's what we're seeing with these new sanctions.
خب دیدیم من سوال میکنم از آقای کلب که صحنه رو توضیح بدن. هم اتفاقی تو نیویورک داشت میافتاد، سخنرانیشون تو خیابان‌های نیویورک و بعد رسانه‌های مختلف خارجی و داخلی که باشون مصاحبه کردن، اصلا قصه رو از زبان ایشون بشنویم. Caleb, explain to me what was happening in the street scene.
Well, that was last September when Obama announced that he had intended to launch cruise missiles to attack Syria. Mm-hmm. And there were many people in the United States who thought that that was wrong. And we decided to gather in Times Square, which is a center in New York City, and have a rally saying, hands off Syria. We pointed out that all throughout the United States, hospitals are closing, schools are closing, fire departments are closing, basic essential services are being cut. But yet the government was willing to spend millions of dollars on war, and currently $18 million every single day are given to the state of Israel by the US government. And we raised that issue. And that day was actually the only time I've ever appeared on CNN, the mainstream TV network in the United States. That was the only appearance I ever had. And when I appeared on CNN earlier that day, before the remarks that I gave in that video, I raised what the Syrian terrorist insurgents are doing. And I said that the Syrian terrorist insurgents were slaughtering people and murdering people. And that was one of the only times viewers in the US ever heard that. That is something that was not permitted to be part of the discourse in the United States. People in the United States had no idea that the terrorist insurgents being funded by our tax dollars, being funded by Saudi Arabia and Qatar, were committing these horrible crimes. That was not raised or ever discussed. And the US media portrayed the terrorists in Syria as if they were some kind of freedom fighters. It was very frightening. And there are some of us who follow international news and knew what was actually going on. And we felt we had to have a rally that day in Times Square to raise the truth and to make clear that if Obama had proceeded and launched those cruise missiles, that would have been a crime. That would have been horrendous. And we rallied, and luckily he did not take that action. Now, currently, Obama has moved into Syria under the guise of allegedly fighting ISIL. But that day, we felt as if we were with the people of the world and opposing the crime our government was hoping to commit.
این تصاویری که مشاهده فرمودید مربوط به تظاهراتی است که در سپتامبر سال گذشته رخ داد در شهر نیویورک ما برگزار کردیم. اون زمانی بود که رئیس جمهور آمریکا آقای باراک اوباما اعلام کرده بود که میخواد از موشک‌های کروز برای حمله به سوریه استفاده کنه. همون تصمیمی که کاملا اشتباه بود. ما تصمیم گرفتیم که در میدان تایمز نیویورک دور هم جمع بشیم و شعار هندز آف سوریا به قول معروف سر بدیم، یعنی اینکه به سوریه کاری نداشته باشیم.
در سوریه کوتاه.
بله. و نکته ما این بود که وقتی که بیمارستان‌های آمریکا داره بسته میشه، مدارس آمریکا داره بسته میشه، ایستگاه‌های آتش نشانی داره بسته میشه و خدمات اساسی که دولت ارائه میده داره کاهش پیدا میکنه، چرا باید میلیون‌ها دلار صرف چنین جنگی بشه در سوریه؟ همونطور که استحضار دارید در حال حاضر دولت آمریکا روزانه مبلغ حدود 18 میلیون دلار به اسرائیل میده. ما این نکته رو برای نخستین بار یا برای تأکید در اون تظاهرات مطرح کردیم من اون روز قبل از اینکه تو این تظاهرات شرکت کنم و سخنرانی داشته باشم برای اولین بار در شبکه تلویزیونی شبکه خبری CNN ظاهر شدم و اون تنها مصاحبه‌ای بود که من با شبکه خبری CNN داشتم. همونطور که استحضار دارید شبکه خبری CNN یکی از شبکه‌های اصلی خبری در ایالات متحده هست و من اونجا این فرصت برام فراهم شد تا بگم که تروریست هایی که به عنوان ستیزجو در سوریه حضور دارن مردم رو کشتار میکنن، مردم رو سلاخی میکنن و این برای اولین بار بود که مخاطبانی که در آمریکا بودن همچین گفتمانی را به قول معروف میشنیدن و همین صحبت‌هایی را میشنیدن و میدیدن که تروریست هایی در آمریکا در سوریه حضور دارن و چه کارهایی انجام میدن و پولی که تأمین میشه از پول مالیات دهندگان آمریکایی هستش. نه تنها پول مالیات دهندگان آمریکایی بلکه کشورهای منطقه‌ای مثل عربستان سعودی و قطر هم بخشی دیگری از این جنایت‌های هولناک و دهشتناکی هست که داره در سوریه رخ میده و متاسفانه رسانه‌های اصلی آمریکا این واقعیت ها رو بیان نمی‌کردن و میگفتن کسایی که در سوریه دارن فعالیت میکنن مبارزان راه آزادی هستند و در خبرهای بین‌المللی این
Let's skip ahead to another part in the interview where we talked. Because, you know, again, this is an English language channel. I apologize to any Farsi speakers, but I'll drop the link. You can watch the whole thing unabridged if you'd like, you know. But yeah, here's...
یعنی چرا تظاهرات یا سخنرانی یا جوسازی یا مقابله با ظلم در این سطح که چرا اوباما میخواد موشک‌های کروز بفرسته به طرف سوریه، چرا درگیری همچین ماجرایشون میشه و این بحث مسلمین در اون طرف دنیا چه ارتباطی به یک جوان 26 ساله داره که از ایالت کشاورزی و یا مثلا مرکزی اوهایو اومده به نیویورک؟ این چه صحنه‌ایه که این جوونا خودشون درگیرش کردن؟ Caleb, I'm concerned about why would you be concerned about cruise missiles that Obama's going to send into Syria? Why would a young man from Ohio be in New York and get involved with these scenes? What's going on?
Well, I was part of the Occupy Wall Street protests that took place in 2011. And those protests, those were young people who were expecting that they would have a kind of higher standard of living that the U.S. has had for a long time. But right now, the U.S. is rapidly transitioning into a low-wage police state. And there are many young people who are upset about it. And in response to their peaceful demonstration, the leaders of the United States came and bashed people's skulls in, maced people with pepper spray, and were very repressive. And, you know, that same police department, the New York City Police Department, that attacked me and my friends when we went out to peacefully demonstrate, is closely linked with Israel and its crimes against the Palestinian people. The New York City Police Department actually has an office in Tel Aviv. Part of the training, as Cyrus mentioned, is watching this hateful anti-Islamic film. The New York City Police Department is devoted to persecuting Muslims in New York City. And they have attacked mosques, they have committed crimes. And so as someone who saw the response of the government to the peaceful protests of myself and my friends, and the links it had to the crimes being committed against Muslims and the crimes being committed against the people of Palestine, I see these links. You know, we share a common enemy. The youth of the United States who are outraged about unemployment and the rising police repression in the United States. We share a common enemy with the people of Palestine, with the people of Iran. We have a common enemy. It's the same forces that are seeking to destroy, simply to destroy humanity. And these are forces that only care about profits and money and really don't care how many people they kill in the process of doing so. And so, you know, that's why I'm so honored to be here in Iran. Youth in Iran should be very proud of the history of their country because all over the world there are people admiring the Islamic Republic of Iran and how it stands with oppressed people all over the world. As an Irish American, I was moved, just truly moved to see that there's a street in this city named after Bobby Sands, that was a martyr of Irish resistance. You know, Iran is a great country with a beautiful history.
Thank you, Kelly.
من یکی از فعالان جنبش موسوم به اشغال وال استریت بودم که در سال 2011 تظاهراتی را در شهر نیویورک و دیگر شهرهای
Well, anyway, that was my interview with the great Nader Talebzadeh. He's an anti-imperialist, if there ever was one. He's a one who stood with the oppressed, one who was just constantly looking for a way to challenge U.S. imperialism, whether it was the oppression of black people in the United States, whether it was the the crimes against the Palestinian people, whether it's the crimes against the people of Yemen. He was really an anti-imperialist, and being able to spend time with him in Iran and have many conversations about what it means to be an American and what kind of role should I play as somebody living at the heart of the empire, and what should I be doing with my life? How can I challenge U.S. imperialism, being at the center of it all? That's something that that I very much, I'm really honored I had the ability to do. So, Nader Talebzadeh has passed on, but he is definitely a hero. He's definitely an ally of the people of the world. Yeah, I'm really, I'm saddened that he has left us, but I'm honored that I got to know him. For the little bit of time I did, I only went to Iran 4 times, but each time that I was in Iran, I got to see this great man and engage with him. And I got to learn from him, and I got to hear his insights. He really, one thing, it wasn't just him, but it's one thing that really made me think. If you want to know about CPI, you want to know about socialism with American characteristics, you want to know about all of that, I started to think about that kind of stuff when I was in Iran. Because when I was in Iran, when I first went to Iran, and I came to Iran, and they knew that I was a member of the Workers' World Party, they knew that I worked for Ramsey Clark, the former U.S. Attorney General. They assumed I was a New York City guy. They assumed I was a New Yorker. They assumed that my parents were communists, that I grew up in a communist family. That's what they assumed about me. So I got there, and I get there, and they're asking me, like, they're basically saying to me, do you want us to take you to an Iranian synagogue so you can go observe the Shabbos? And I said, no. I said, I'm not Jewish. I grew up Christian. And they're like, really? They're like, okay, interesting. And they said, where are you from? We heard you live in Brooklyn. I said, well, I do live in Brooklyn, but I'm originally from Ohio. And the Iranians were like, you're from Ohio? And you're a communist? And you're an anti-imperialist activist? Like, he was like, wow. They were just blown away. And they were like, they talked to me, and they said, Caleb, it's people like you from Ohio that support Israel. And it's people like you from Ohio that think we're all trying to kill them, that we're the kind of people that would do 9/11, even though 9/11 was done by the Saudis. And they said, you have a responsibility as somebody from Ohio to spread anti-imperialism. You know what I mean? There's guys from New York, there's guys from Brooklyn who come here all the time, who write books and are anti-imperialist. But you are from the real America, they said to me. You're from the real America. You're from the heartland. And you need to embrace your identity, they told me. They said, there's no reason for you to try to be something you're not. And we had a lot of conversations. And, a lot of these people had never been to the United States. Nader had been to the United States and spent a lot of time in the United States, but not all of these people had lived in the United States. There was some impressions about Americans. I remember there was one person who said to me that, maybe some Americans would like the Houthis because the Houthis have guns, right? And it's true. The Houthi rebels, the anti-imperialists of Yemen, part of their religion is that every man must have a gun. In the Quran, it says that every man should have a sword to protect his household. And they basically argue that the modern version of a sword is a gun. So it is the responsibility of every male in Yemen, they believe, that every man should have a gun. And they said, in America, guys like you from Ohio, you guys like guns a lot too. So maybe you can get Americans to like the Yemenis because they believe that they should have a gun. I thought that was kind of sweet. It's the stereotype of Americans around the world that we're all, waving guns everywhere and we're all a bunch of gun nuts. And there's some truth in it. There's plenty of truth in that. But then I learned, I actually learned more about it. And I actually found out that, if there's many pictures on the internet of the Houthi rebels in Yemen, waving guns around in the air, and you can see them, they're waving their guns around. Right. And what that is that is a religious statement. They're saying we are going to practice our faith, and they're also telling the government, because the previous government of Yemen, the Saudi-backed government, was trying to disarm them. And so they're waving their gun around and they're saying, we will not be disarmed. We are going to carry our gun. Our religion says we have to have a gun. In Iran, they don't interpret the Quran that way. They don't argue that people should have guns. They don't agree with that. They just feel like it's a statement that one should defend one's household. But the Houthis, that is one of their beliefs. Every man should have a gun. Every man should have a gun. That is one of their beliefs. And so they told me that the Houthis believe that every man should have a gun. And they said maybe at that point, maybe you can get Americans to sympathize with the Houthis because they also believe that you should have guns. I thought that was funny. It was funny, but it showed that they were, the fact that so many people in middle America, Rust Belt America, who've lost their jobs, seen their communities destroyed, are big supporters of attacks on Iran and big supporters of Israel. It's a contradiction. And that, it's people from small towns like mine who've really been hurt the most by neoliberalism and free market policies. And, when I was in Iran, it was weird. The whole time I'd been in the Workers' World Party, I was constantly feeling ashamed of my identity. I was constantly feeling like, I'm from a little hillbilly town in Ohio, and I grew up in a conservative, Christian family, and I was constantly trying to like pretend I was something else. I was constantly trying to be a hipster, constantly trying to be this radical, constantly trying to do things. And when I got to Iran, they said to me, no, we actually are really blown away that somebody from your background could become an anti-imperialist and could become an ally of the anti-imperialist forces around the world in the struggle against imperialism. And that's very special, they told me. That's very, very special. And that shows you have something unique to offer, right? You can get people from a background like yours to see who their real enemy is. We talked a lot about Ron Paul, and we talked a lot about Alex Jones, and we talked about anti-imperialism. And it was like the first time that I was doing some kind of leftist anti-imperialist activism where I actually felt like, wow, my identity as a white guy from Ohio isn't something I should be trying to escape. It's actually something I should embrace, and that I should find a way to bring anti-imperialism to the broad masses of people. And I should try to bring anti-imperialism out of the movement to the masses. And it was in Iran that I first started thinking that, because I had never been approached with that. Never had these, boomer communists I'd been around thought of this, right? It was always just, the working people of small towns, the working people in the Midwest are all a bunch of hillbillies and white trash and Ku Klux Klansmen. And, they're all racist and evil and all of that. And here I was in Iran, and I was hearing from the Iranians how important it is to spread anti-imperialism among people who grew up in small towns like I grew up in. And that really made me think. Now, everything didn't get pieced together yet, I mean, it wasn't until 2016, the election of Donald Trump, and suddenly I realized that if we're going to defeat the imperialists, we got to turn around. We got to change the method that we're using. And everything that we've built with CPI, that beautiful conference that we just had in Austin, and that, that amazing, this YouTube channel, and the John Brown volunteers, and so much of the writing I've done, a lot of that, we can thank Nader Talebzadeh for that. If it hadn't been for Nader Talebzadeh talking to me, spending time with me, telling me how important it was, and getting me to think outside of this stupid woke leftist mindset that I had, and getting me to really see things from a wider perspective, getting me to really understand, the role that I could play and the contribution that I could really make. If it hadn't been for that, I might not be here today. All of this might not have happened. I mean, he's really responsible in a lot of ways for everything that you see here. Not directly. I mean, this guy's a Muslim. I'm a Christian. This guy is, I mean, very socially conservative, and a lot of his positions on a lot of things I certainly don't endorse. But the fact that he sat down with me as someone who'd lived in both the United States and Iran, and he could see that in my bones I was a real anti-imperialist. He knew Ramsey Clark very well. He knew the former U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark. And this guy, he basically said to me, you can do better than this. He didn't confront me in an angry way. It wasn't like, come on, Caleb, don't sound like a woke. It wasn't saying like that at all. It wasn't like that at all. It was you could make a great contribution to defeating U.S. imperialism. Caleb, you could make a great contribution to overthrowing imperialism, to helping defeat Zionism, to helping aid the people of this region. You could do that, Caleb. But in order to do that, you gotta be different. You gotta not run away from who you are. You gotta embrace your background and your people and your history. And you gotta find a way to get the people, people like you, to realize who their real enemy is, and to stand with the Black people in their struggle against racism and police brutality, and also to stand with countries like Iran and countries like Cuba and countries like Venezuela. We can really thank this man for a lot of it. I mean, it was years later I came up with Out of the Movement to the Masses, but this guy did it. I mean, this guy he got the ball rolling. What we see now with CPI, with the CPI approach, patriotic socialism, socialism with American characteristics, Out of the Movement to the Masses, government of action to fight for working families. This man who just died today, this great, great man, this hero of the Islamic Revolution, this anti-imperialist, this man had a lot to do with what you see here today. What you all keep coming back to this channel to see has a lot to do with this man. And I want you all to know that. I really want you all to know that. I really want you to know that because it's important. And a lot of people don't understand, a lot of people that are still caught up in this woke mindset, they say things like socialism with American characteristics is racist. Socialism with American characteristics is American chauvinist. Socialism with American characteristics is trying to glorify U.S. imperialism. And they have no effing clue what they're talking about, because it's real anti-imperialists like Nader Talebzadeh, like the Venezuelans, like the Cubans, that got me thinking this way. I would not have ever started thinking this way if it wasn't for talking with real anti-imperialists in real anti-imperialist countries who are involved in real life and death struggles against U.S. imperialism, who told me that we need to get serious. And, they are so polite. They are so polite and patient with American leftists. I don't have to be. I don't have to be polite and patient with American leftists. I can get mad, and I can say what needs to be said, which is that we need to grow the fuck up. We need to grow the fuck up. We need to stop the internet LARPing, and we need to take our fucking responsibility seriously. We are in the middle of the empire. We are in the heart of the beast. We are at the center of this global imperialist system. And you want us to fuck around and go, oh, I hate this country, burn the American flags, isolate ourselves, not develop a mass movement so we can just feel good about ourselves on the internet. Grow the fuck up. Seriously. Our job is so important. You have no idea. People are counting on us around the world to bring down this evil system. And they need us to be responsible in how we do it. And they need us to take this seriously, and to do it in a way where we could actually win, where we could actually get to the broad masses of people and get them to stand with the people of the world. Nader didn't get mad at me. He was so kind to me, and he was so patient with me. And he listened to me as I complained about other guests at their conference. Well, that person's anti-Semitic. I don't want to be associated with them. And he was patient with me. And he said, well, Caleb, not everyone sees it the way you do. And, but I don't have to be nice like he was, because I'm an American leftist, and I'm saying that if you're an American leftist, it's time we do what Nader was gently and carefully urging me to do, which is take this seriously. Take this seriously. Take your responsibility seriously. Start advocating real politics. Start advocating real anti-imperialism. Yeah. Yeah. That's what needs to be done. And that's what needs to be done. And Nader really deserves a blessing. What do you think the working class or Native need that the left could provide at this moment? Oh, that's a good question. What do you think people of your native region need that the left could provide at this moment? So that's really what I've got to say about that. And oh, thank you, Garland. I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Thank you for your contribution. Um, that's really what I've got to say on this at this point, because yeah, I mean, we can talk about Iran a little bit. I mean, every time I went to Iran, I realized more and more, Trump supporters being anti-Bush. I realized more and more when I was in Iran that everything we think is true about Iran, Trump supporters being anti-Bush, everything we thought is true about Iran, is actually true about Saudi Arabia. Women in Iran are brigadier generals in the army. Women in Iran are members of parliament. There's a very large, far more women in the Iranian parliament than in the American Congress. Women in Iran vote. They're elected to office, etc. Meanwhile, it's Saudi Arabia, the U.S.-backed regime that arrests women for driving cars and just changed the law to allow women to drive cars. It's Saudi Arabia that cuts off people's heads in public, and there's a lot of things. I mean, yes, in Iran they are religious; they don't like homosexuality. But there's a gay neighborhood in Tehran that everyone knows is the gay neighborhood. The police leave it alone. They don't execute gay people. That's a lie. In order to execute somebody for being gay, you would have to actually, you have to, technically, yes, you could, but there would have to be 4 witnesses who actually saw the homosexual act happening. And then they would have to explain why they didn't try to stop you, which is a crime on their part. So no one's ever been executed in Iran for being gay. There was a photo going around of 2 guys that were hung, but they weren't hung for being gay. They were hung for raping a 13-year-old boy at knife point. They grabbed a 13-year-old boy and raped him. That's a little bit different. Now, I'm not a big fan of the death penalty. I don't believe in the death penalty. But I think executing somebody for raping a child, someone who's underage, is very different than executing someone for being gay. They do have they do have a lesser crime called like perversion or something like that, that generally what happens is if you're charged with that, you pay a fine, and it's not enforced in certain areas. And that's not good. I mean, I'm still not okay with that, right? It should be okay to, to be who you are. I'm not okay with that. But at the same time, a lot of what we think is true about Iran is not true. One thing about Iran is they are super pro-trans. And you wouldn't think that, would you? You'd think, wow, this is a country that's really against homosexuality. They must be really anti-trans. You couldn't be more wrong. In Iran, they will give you trans surgery for free. If you want it, they will give you transgender surgery for free. Iran is a lot like Cuba, where they have medical schools that are free. So a lot of people get medical school education for free. And so they have a lot more doctors than they need. They have kind of a huge amount of doctors. A lot of people go to medical school, and then there's only so many slots to work in the hospitals. And so there's a lot of doctors who are out of work. So because of that, Iran is the capital of transgender surgery for the Middle East. People from all over the Middle East go to Iran to get transgender surgery. And if you're an Iranian citizen, they will give it to you for free. Furthermore, Iran's also the capital of plastic surgery. People from all over the Middle East go to Iran to get nose jobs. Whenever I was in a hotel, there'd be a lot of women, with bandages on their nose, because they'd come to Iran to get nose jobs because it's cheaper. So everything you think you know about Iran, you don't know, right? It's much more complicated than that. Iran it's a different culture. It's a different culture. It's a different background. Not everything there is good. There are some things, I mean, with human rights that are not good. And, I'm not going to gloss over, the bad things, right? And I'm not going to pretend that there aren't issues with religious minorities and such, but Iran is a revolutionary country that's standing up to the U.S. imperialists. Iran is a great country that's on our side against Wall Street and against London. And yeah, so I guess I'll just end my opening remarks by saying that. But thank you everybody for that. And I guess we'll do the roll call, and then I'll start answering your super chat questions, and then that will be our show, and then we'll be done. So there you go. All right, names and locations. Who's with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. Names and locations. Very good. Very good. Names and locations, folks. I'll call you out as I see you. All right, we got Cleveland Pirate Alex. We got MJ from California. We got Carolyn from Staten Island. We got Arturo from Alaska. Neil Fraser in Hong Kong. We got Jonathan from Arkansas. North Bergen County. Tristan in Maryland. Ryan in Oakland. Bendigo, Australia. David Fox. Class Analysis. Ryan in Oakland. Gabo Hernandez in Chicago. Meredith Anderson. Quinn and Meredith from Eatonville. Rice from Adelaide, Australia. AG from Port Huron. JT24 from Mississippi. Chris in Salt Lake City, Bendigo, Australia, Mo in Toronto, Billy Kane, Isaiah in Texas, Char Darling in Nassau County, Bob Troy, New York, Dorian in LA, Northern Michigan, very, very good, Sean in Oregon, Chaya from Montreal, Tim in La Junta, Brisbane, Australia, Jose in Caracas, Venezuela, Scott from Northern Miami, Hakeem from Iraq, Garland Nixon is in Pasadena, Maryland. Shout out to Garland. Everyone should go subscribe to Garland Nixon's channel right now, by the way. Garland is amazing. He has some great guests. He's a part of the radio show, the Critical Hour that is on Sputnik Radio every day. He's got a great YouTube channel. Go check out Garland Nixon right now. He does great stuff. Just an awesome dude. Go check out Garland Nixon. I've been on his channel a few times. He's got a radio show, I believe, on Pacifica Radio in DC as well. So go check out Garland Nixon. We got Joe Gale in Nassau County. We got JR in Kalamazoo. We got Wesley from Manchester, Molly from New Jersey, USA. We got Mohsin from Iran. We got Sydney, Australia. We got Chicagoland, Jordan. We got Work in Progress in Ottawa. We got Bergen County, Christian from Northern New Jersey. We got Yuri from Wisconsin. We got China. We got Philip from Houston, Texas. We got Kim and Dublin, Ireland. We got Northern California. Bradley Wasser from St. Louis. Dario from Brooklyn. A lot of people. Hello, Caitlin from Chicago. Welcome, Caitlin. Chat too fast. Too many people. Very good. Tomas from Sweden. Dorian in LA. Char Darling in Nassau County. Shout out to you, Char. Isaiah in Texas. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, everybody. So great to have you here. We got Berkeley, California, Brandon Harrington, Bayonne, New Jersey, Red Illuminati, Nathaniel from Washington, Jenny Lynn in Cincinnati, Ohio. Shout out to you, Jenny Lynn. This is good stuff, folks. Good stuff. All right, folks. All right, we're going to start answering people's super chat questions. So first question, why was the Soviet Union unable to stop the nationalist color revolutions? The color revolutions weren't entirely nationalist. We're talking about, at the late 1980s, 1989, 1990, 1991, the various Marxist-Leninist governments of Eastern Europe that were aligned with the Soviet Union fell, and then eventually the Soviet Union fell. Great show as always, Caleb. Thanks. Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that. Why was the Soviet Union unable to stop them? Why did they fall? Well, there's many factors involved in that. As I've gone over many times on this program, the primary factor was that the people that really wanted to overthrow those governments were not average working class people. It wasn't your typical farmer, it wasn't your typical miner or factory worker who was going out to protest to overthrow the government of Czechoslovakia or East Germany or or Poland. It tended to be the elite. It was the children of the elite. The college educated folks who were professors, they were doctors, they were engineers, they were scientists, they were filmmakers. It was that layer of people that are, they're people that are a little bit more creative, a little more skilled, a little more educated, Often, they got that position by being part of the party elite or being from a background. They were connected to people in power. And it was those folks, a lot of them just felt stifled by the socialist system. They said, look, I should be able to start my own business. I should be able to invent a new product. I should be able to make films that I don't have to get approved by the party censors. And that it was this kind of this middle class layer. And they're not in socialism, they're not a middle class, right? Because it's like, it's the state run economy, but they're a layer of people that have more education and they have different jobs than average people, but they feel kind of stifled. One story I've often heard, this happened in Cuba, it happened in a lot of socialist countries, is doctors would burn their money, right? If you're a doctor in Eastern Europe, if you're a doctor in Hungary or Poland or Czechoslovakia, you're going to get more money than everybody else. But what are you going to do with it, right? You can't buy a new house. You can't buy a new car. You only get one house. You only get one car. You can't start a business with it, right? You can't invest it on the stock market. You can't buy more food with it. Food is rationed. And so as a result of that, we got Kieran from San Diego and Gabo Hernandez. Shout out to both of you. As a result of that, they felt stuck, and they're working in kind of an economy where you have a heavy-handed state bureaucracy that's carefully regulating them, and they feel like their ability to go out and create and succeed is being restrained. And those were the people that actually laid the basis for the counter-revolutions. What is the petty bourgeoisie, and what was it different during Marx's time? Okay. Oh, thank you, Randy. Thank you, Randy Lohr. What is the petty bourgeoisie? And it was those folks who felt stifled by the socialist system. And most of them were not big supporters of capitalism. If you asked most of them, are they capitalists? They would say no. They would say that they were in favor of socialism with a human face. They would say they were in favor of social democracy, democratic socialism. I've seen a lot of hate for anti-imperialism develop in the last decade, exactly when it's needed. That is so true. All right, we'll write it down. I have seen a lot of hate for anti-imperialism develop. And, they felt stifled by the socialist system. And then it was the synthetic left, the fake left that kind of courted these people, the people who kind of pretended to be friends of the Soviet Union, but were aligned with these elements that wanted to bring it down. Why did the whites ally with the Soviets against the Chinese nationalists? The white army. Are you referring to the white army? The whites? What are you talking about? Whites ally with the Soviets against the Chinese nationalists. I don't know what you're talking about there, Scott, because the Soviet Union was supporting the Chinese nationalists. So I have no idea what you're talking about. The KMT party in China got Soviet support. So I have no idea what you're talking about, Scott. But anyway, so it was that layer of people that felt stifled by the socialist system that were kind of the basis for it. The basis for the counter-revolution. The synthetic left, the liberal college professors and George Soros. I mean, George Soros brags about all the funding of arts and sciences and the courting of intellectuals in the Eastern Bloc that he did. That's not just a crazy conspiracy theory. I mean, if you look at the Open Society Institute's website, they openly brag about what George Soros did to court those elements that had real grievances and kind of manipulate them to help bring down those countries. Also, you can talk about the fact that the party bureaucracy, the way that the model of these Eastern European countries had developed was very, very rigid. There wasn't a lot of room for innovation. It wasn't like they could adjust the policies to make people happier. So the rigidness of the system, of the Soviet style, really existing socialist system, and the inability to adapt and change to new conditions, the layer of intellectuals and people like that felt trapped and stifled, the manipulation of the synthetic left, all kind of helped bring down socialism in the Eastern Bloc. And the sad thing is that, you can read a lot of people in the former Eastern Bloc said they didn't know what they had. They thought they would be able to keep their guaranteed job, keep their guaranteed health care, and shop at Walmart, and listen to Beatles records, and wear blue jeans. Well, what they got was they lost their guaranteed jobs. They lost their guaranteed health care. They had devastating poverty. And maybe they could buy Beatles records and blue jeans, but they couldn't afford it. I mean, it economically destroyed these countries. Sex trafficking went through the roof after the fall of the Soviet Union. Heroin gangs, poverty. A lot of these countries had 20 to 30% unemployment. A lot of Ukrainian cities in the 90s only had electricity for 3 or 4 hours a day. I mean, it was bad. The fall of the Soviet Union was bad. It was bad. It was bad in Russia, but it was even worse in the surrounding countries. And in the fall of the Eastern Bloc, these people thought they were fighting for human rights. They thought they were fighting for socialism with a human face. They were really being manipulated, and they were fighting for neoliberalism and privatization and the economic wrecking of their countries. So there you go. All right. How much did Harry Haywood's ideas influence the Black liberation movement in the 1970s? Not very much, Chaya. I'll just be honest with you. Not very much. Harry Haywood was a leader of the Communist Party in the 1930s who was Black. He was the leader of the the African Blood Brotherhood, which was a Black revolutionary group that taught armed self-defense against the Ku Klux Klan. And they merged into the Communist Party in the 1920s. Harry Haywood was a leader of the Communist Party, and he developed their thesis on the national question and the idea that Black people are a colonized people within U.S. borders that have the right to their own sovereign territory if they choose. That's Harry Haywood. And he was kicked out of the Communist Party in the 1950s because he wouldn't abandon the Black Belt thesis. He became a supporter of China. He eventually joined the October League, which was a big Maoist group. And he was a very important revolutionary figure. But the Black liberation movement of the 1970s, he was an influence on communists, and he was an influence on communists and their approach to the national question. Oh, thank you, Steve, very much. Lenin and Stalin was pure evil. Okay, I don't think that's correct, but there you go. And thank you, Steve. Harry Haywood was an influence on communists, but largely the Black liberation movement in the 70s. The Black Panthers were a huge influence, and they were Marxist-Leninists. But cultural nationalism was very, very big. But Harry Haywood was a little bit obscure. He didn't really come into prominence until the 70s, right? I mean, he was prominent among communists, and it was in the 70s that his autobiography, Black Bolshevik, was published, and that the October League, which was his communist group, was really promoting his stuff. But he was not a big influence. I mean, I'll just be real with you. Malcolm X was a huge influence, and cultural nationalism was a big influence. We still have Kwanzaa as a holiday, and that was brought to you by Ron Karenga. Dr. Manwala Karenga, also known as Ron Karenga, was the leader of the United Slaves Organization, the US organization that was in California, and he was a cultural nationalist. And it's actually a matter of public record that Black nationalism, and again, the thing is, you got to look at these things in a nuanced way. I am a huge supporter of Black nationalism. Whenever Black people are fighting for their rights as a nation, as a colonized people, I support it. But I can still admit what I'm about to admit, which is it is a fact that in the early 60s, there was a fear that the Black community would become communist. Okay? So in the early 60s, in response to the rise of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, and in response to the rise of African liberation struggles, there was covert government support from the U.S. government for some Black nationalists. That is true. And in a lot of urban centers, there were poverty programs that were staffed by Black nationalists, staffed by members of Black Muslim organizations, staffed by in some cases Black criminal like gangs basically were hired and given money to run poverty programs. And there was an attempt to build up Black nationalism, what they call cultural nationalism, as a barrier against communism. And it backfired, because then you got the Black Panthers that were Black nationalist communists, and you got the Black liberation movement, and it got out of their control. But for a while, there was a calculated decision on the part of the ruling class of the United States in the 60s, early 60s, to funnel money to Black nationalists. Does that mean Black nationalism is bad? No. Does that mean Black nationalism is a conspiracy? No. This was a maneuver. It was just a maneuver by the ruling class, and it blew up in their face. But yeah, there was an effort. I believe one of the most famous examples of that is the Blackstone Nation. It's called the Blackstone Nation, and it's a criminal gang. Black P. Stone, Blackstone Nation. It was a Black nationalist gang in Chicago, and the city of Chicago hired them to run government programs, and they ran community centers, and they were getting government money to do it. And, the government said, oh, we had no idea these people were criminals and that they were dealing drugs and that they were assassinating people. We're just giving them money. Well, they did know, right? Grenada and their struggle. All right. They did know, right? They did know. Grenada and their struggle. And they did know. But the idea was, by giving them government money, they could be used to as a layer to prevent black communist groups from emerging. But then it was people like that eventually joined the Black Panthers. So it didn't, it was often people from such organizations that then were inspired by Mao and by the Vietnamese and then became Black Panthers. And so it doesn't always work out in their favor. But yeah, that's true. And cultural nationalists, they had a bigger impact. That is just a fact. They had a bigger impact. The Black Panthers had a huge impact, and they were Marxist Black nationalists. But yeah, Harry Haywood was pretty obscure. The Maoists liked him. Maoist communists liked him. I'll tell you a wild story. When I first bought a copy of Black Bolshevik, I was reading it. I was in Detroit in 2010 at the U.S. Social Forum, and I was sitting on a park bench, and I had it in my hand. And this guy walked up to me, and he was like, "Oh, you're reading that book. Where'd you get that?" And I said, "Oh, I got it at the at a literature table today." Turns out he was the guy who had edited it. He had been one of the proofreaders of the book. He was the guy who edits New Amsterdam News, which is a Black nationalist newspaper in New York City. And he had been one of the people who proofread and helped compile that book for Harry Haywood. And that was kind of neat to actually meet somebody who had helped put that book out. That was really, really neat. But the editor of New Amsterdam News, he was somebody who had put it out. So that was pretty neat. But yeah, and I recommend it. I learned a lot from Harry Haywood's book. It's a great book. All right. Black Bolshevik by Harry Haywood is a very important book. All right. Why was Marx pro-Mexican American War? Because Marx believed that that Mexico's economy at that point, this was before the Mexican Revolution, was largely a feudal economy. You had, a class of wealthy people, who were of Spanish background, who ruled over the people in Mexico that were more indigenous, and it was more like feudalism, right? It was a feudal plantation system, and there was no slavery, though. I mean, there was no slavery, but there was still, it had, feudalistic. It was an agrarian economy with feudalist attributes, and at the same time, the United States was starting to have industrial capitalism. So Karl Marx mistakenly believed that if the USA were to take over Mexico, that would lead to spreading industrial capitalism to Mexico. It would create a Mexican proletariat, and that Mexican proletariat could then have socialism. And this is, Karl Marx said that the British colonizing India was awful, but it would lead to eventually progress, right? That's a big theme in Marx. There's a Eurocentrism where he believes basically that Europe has capitalism first, so that means that Europe will have socialism first, and that Europe is the most advanced, and that, unfortunately, in Marx's view, colonialism and all that would lead to eventually laying the basis for these countries to become capitalist. And so Marx, he supported the British colonizing India. He supported, he thought that the Mexican-American War was right. However, Friedrich Engels corrected Karl Marx on that. Friedrich Engels said, no, this is not a war to bring capitalism to Mexico. If that was the case, the Mexican people would have been welcoming the U.S. imperialists, right? They would have been saying to the USA, oh, come free us and bring us some. That wasn't the case. The war to seize Mexico, to seize Texas, to seize California from Mexico was actually a war to expand the slave system. It was for the slave owners, and it was the most reactionary, backward part of U.S. society, the plantation system, trying to seize more territory to have more slave plantations. And in Mexico, they didn't have slavery. I mean, they did have a plantation system and like serfdom, basically, but they didn't have slavery. And so in a way, Engels, pointed out to Marx that actually the seizure of Texas, the seizure of California, the seizure of New Mexico is actually anti-historical progress. It's going to lead to strengthening the slaveholders in the U.S. South. And Abraham Lincoln realized that. Abraham Lincoln said that the Mexican-American War was the most unjust war that was ever fought. Who else was it? I believe Ulysses S. Grant, who was the leader of the Union Army, who actually fought in that war. In his autobiography, he says it was a horrendous war. They had no business fighting it. And one of the most beautiful stories I've ever heard, and it's true, is the St. Patrick's Battalion. Have you ever heard of the St. Patrick's Battalion? The St. Patrick's Battalion was a group of Irish Americans who had immigrated to the United States from Ireland. They were drafted to go fight, and they were treated like crap in the U.S. Army because they were Irish and they were Roman Catholic. This was, at a time when Catholics were considered to be not real Christians and discriminated against in the United States. And when they got to Mexico, they were ordered to burn churches and to murder nuns and priests. And they said, wow, the Mexicans are Catholic and we're Catholic. And we're getting treated like crap by the U.S. Army for being Catholic. And the U.S. Army is telling us to go murder other Catholics like us. And so they switched sides. The St. Patrick's Battalion, they switched sides and they joined the Mexican Revolution. They joined the Mexican people. And it's an amazing, amazing story. The St. Patrick's Battalion, and they're heroes all through Mexico. I mean, there are murals to them. There are statues of them. It's an amazing story of anti-imperialism, right? They turned their guns around and they stood with the Mexican people. Karl Marx was dead wrong in his position on the Mexican-American War, and Engels corrected him. Frederick Engels corrected him. Abraham Lincoln was right about it. Ulysses S. Grant was right about it. I believe Henry David Thoreau, who was the great intellectual of the North, kind of a progressive intellectual at the time of New England, a New England radical. Henry David Thoreau refused to pay his taxes in protest of the war. Every abolitionist and anti-slavery person was opposed to the Mexican-American War because it was a war of colonialism to expand. It was on behalf of the slave traders. They wanted more slave states, basically. So there you go. All right. Next question. May Day is coming up, right? International Workers' Day, May Day, the working class holiday. Workers of the world unite. And there's going to be 4 different protests here in New York City. I don't know where they are. 4 different protests here in New York City. There's going to be protests in Washington, D.C. I know some of the Students and Youth for a New America people are going to be out in the streets in D.C. There's protests all over the country. And, it's a good place to go to talk to people. Unfortunately, a lot of the communist groups and leftist groups are not where we're at the Center for Political Innovation, but that's okay. We ought to have dialogue with those people. And we got to try to win them to have more of a mass line to try and reach average people. And we're not going to do that if we just boycott anything they do. Our main focus should be on getting out of the movement to the masses, but going to their demonstrations is an important thing to do sometimes, right? What do you think people of your native region need that the left could provide them with at this point? Who was behind the assassination of Trotsky and why at that particular time? All right. What do the people of my native region, Ohio, need that that could be provided for them by the left? Jobs, lower food prices, lower gas prices, an end to the heroin epidemic, infrastructure. If you go back to my home state of Ohio, it's devastated. Opioids have taken so many lives. Lack of jobs, lack of education, lack of basic infrastructure. The power plants are crumbling. The roads are falling apart. What else? An end to the wars. You know how many people I went to school with who went into the U.S. military? There's people in my little town in Ohio who died in Iraq, who got killed in the Iraq war. And for what? For weapons of mass destruction that weren't there, for the big oil companies so they could beat down one of their competitors, the Iraqi government. So yeah, an end to the wars. They could use an end to the wars. I think they could absolutely use that. And again, the left socialists need to become the champions of common people. And that doesn't mean we abandon the struggle against racism. That means that we build the struggle against racism, but we do it on the basis not of guilt, not of shame, but on the basis of solidarity. White workers need to understand that they have a common ally in standing with the Black Revolutionary Movement against the brutal U.S. state and against Wall Street and U.S. imperialism. So there you go. One of the best pieces, I'm actually going to throw it in the chat here. This is one of the most important, I'm critical of Sam Marcy, right? I am critical of Sam Marcy, but one of the best things that Sam Marcy, the founder of the Workers' World Party, ever wrote is this piece that I'm about to throw in the chat. And I mean, we need to get this everywhere, right? Because this is how to oppose racism. Sam Marcy wrote this beautiful letter. This is Sam Marcy's letter to the workers of Louisiana, 1991. It's dated November 21st, 1991. Message to the workers of Louisiana by Sam Marcy. And it is Sam Marcy urging the workers of Louisiana not to vote for David Duke. David Duke was is a white supremacist, an anti-Semite, a fascist, and he was running for governor of Louisiana. And, Sam Marcy didn't want a fascist to become the governor of Louisiana, but he knew that a lot of working class people in Louisiana, which is a low income state in the South, were considering voting for David Duke. So he wrote this beautiful letter to the workers of Louisiana about why they shouldn't vote for David Duke. And I mean, this is how you fight racism, okay? This is the correct approach. If you approach the working class, the white working class, this way, showing them that racism hurts them and that supporting Black people in their freedom struggle helps them, you can win people to oppose racism. The woke stuff ain't gonna do it. But you look at it: rich state, poor people. Louisiana is not poor. It has one of the greatest natural resources in the world, oil. It also has another important source of energy, natural gas. It's got a big petrochemical industry. So why is life becoming more difficult? Consider one thing that David Duke never seems to mention. Whether you make your living as a wage worker or as a professional, your income level is lower than that of comparable work in the northern, eastern, and central United States. If you're a public school teacher, this kind of differential in pay between Louisiana and other states holds true not only for teachers, but other professionals. Some say, and properly so, that wages in Louisiana are better than Mississippi, Arkansas, or other states of the old Confederacy. That only helps make the most important point. Why should southern states have lower wages than the rest of the U.S.? It's not because of geography. History makes a difference. I mean, this is amazing stuff. And he talks about Thomas Jefferson and slavery, and he talks about, it is powerful stuff, and about how it's big corporations who get welfare and are the welfare queens. This is amazing stuff. And how David Duke, preaching hatred for Black people, blaming the problems of Louisiana on Black people, is protecting the real enemy, which is the capitalist class. This letter, letter to the workers of Louisiana, why not to vote for David Duke? I wish everyone could read this. I wish every woke could read this. Everyone who's on the internet talking about white privilege and all that needs to read this letter, because this is how you can win people against racism. He's making a very coherent, clear argument that David Duke is your enemy. If you're a working class person, David Duke is not your ally. He's working for the big capitalists to help divide the workers, to help foment racial division and, cement and help oppress the Black people. And it's beautiful stuff. That is the approach to fighting racism that is absolutely needed. All right. Trump supporters being anti-Bush. Look, if you are a real anti-imperialist, there's one moment during that 2016 campaign that had to put a smile on your face. And that was when Donald Trump turned to Jeb Bush and said, everybody knows your brother lied. Your brother lied us into a war. All kinds of people got killed for no good reason. There were no weapons of mass destruction. Your brother lied. It was amazing. It was an amazing moment. It was utterly amazing. And to have the Republican the leading Republican presidential candidate who eventually became the Republican nominee for president say that, that's something Michael Moore would have said. All right. That was in 2004, that was a Michael Moore talking point. And to have the top Republican saying that showed that the neocons and the Bush people were so discredited. And most of the people who voted for Trump were happy that he said stuff like that. They saw him as fighting the establishment. They saw him as standing up against the establishment that lied its way into the Iraq War. And even among the hardcore Republicans, there was a feeling that the Iraq War was on lies. It was a mistake, and that's why, ever since Bush left office, the neocon element in the Republican Party has been in crisis. Trump was the only way the Republicans could get back into the White House. They had to have a Republican who talked that way, because a Republican who talked like Bush, the American people were not going to vote for him. So there you go. There you go. Next question. What is the petty bourgeoisie? All right. So Marxism generally refers to, in modern capitalist society, you have two classes. You have the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. The bourgeoisie are those who own the banks, factories, and industries. They make their living by owning, right? They reap profits, right? They own the banks, they own the oil wells, they own the big box stores, they own the health insurance companies, they own huge real estate development companies, and that's how they make their profits, right? Is through ownership. However, the majority of humanity are the proletariat, and we don't own for a living. We sell our labor power, right? We work for a living. We rent ourselves out to a capitalist boss who turns our wages into profits, and those are the two great classes, right? But within those classes, there are divisions. For example, among the bourgeoisie, you have what are called the big bourgeoisie. Those are the millionaires and billionaires who actually run the government. And then you have what's called the petty bourgeoisie, which are people that are technically part of the owning class, but they don't have any power, right? A guy who owns a bar or a restaurant, a guy who started his own high-tech startup company, a professional, a doctor, a lawyer. Those people, a doctor with his own practice, a lawyer with his own practice, technically they're part of the petty bourgeoisie. A small shopkeeper who owns his own store, okay, technically they're part of the petty bourgeoisie, but they're not part of the ruling class, right? Technically, they have the same relationship to the means of production as the capitalists do, but they're a low-level capitalist who has no power, and that's what petty bourgeois means. And what does it mean to be petty bourgeois? It means that you are not a proletarian, right? It means that you have some level of individuality. You own your store, right? You own your business, right? There's a level of the petty bourgeoisie, and the petty bourgeoisie is the class without a future because it's being crushed from both sides. The proletariat and the labor movement threaten the petty bourgeoisie, and the bourgeoisie, the big bourgeoisie, threaten the petty bourgeoisie. The proletariat threatens to seize their property in a socialist revolution. The big bourgeoisie threatens to crush their independence and reduce them to being proletarians and absorb them into huge corporate conglomerates. So basically, it's a class without a future. And a lot of literature is what you can call petty bourgeois fatalism. Ayn Rand's novel Anthem, 1984 by George Orwell, the book Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. This is what you can call a petty bourgeois a petty bourgeois fatalist worldview. The idea that, there's no hope because either way, communism or fascism, right? Big capitalists taking over, that's going to be corporate fascism. The workers taking over, it's going to be communism. Either of those and the petty bourgeoisie as a class. And that's why post-World War II, you got petty bourgeois fatalism. You got so much dystopian fiction. And it's, that's what petty bourgeois means. And, there are other divisions, right? Among the working class, there's what you call the aristocracy of labor. Those are working class people who are wealthy enough that they start to develop kind of a petty bourgeois mindset. That's what's argued. There's the lumpen proletariat, which are sections of the working class that are permanently unemployed and desperate and poor. And on some level, since they're not able to sell their labor power fully, they're like, running a gang or something. They often will have kind of a small business owner mindset, and they're basically so desperate that they're available to whoever can feed them, basically. And they're often the basis of strike breaking and the basis of Bonapartist maneuvering. And there's the lumpen proletariat. And, there are like what you can call subclasses. So you have the big bourgeoisie and the petty bourgeoisie. You have among the proletariat, you have the aristocracy of labor, you have the proletariat, and then you have the lumpen proletariat. So there we go. All right. Next question. Seen a lot of hate for anti-imperialism develop. Yeah, Well, of course, the reason that they're psyching people up against anti-imperialism is because it's needed now more than ever, and they know it. And that's the specter. If you honestly, so many people are getting into socialism and Marxism now. If you honestly read this stuff, you have to become an anti-imperialist. You can't just want a worker cooperative, right? And so they're trying their hardest to inoculate people against anti-imperialism because it is so widespread. All right, next question. Grenada and their struggles. I don't know enough about Maurice Bishop. I don't know enough about, the government in Grenada in the lead up to the U.S. invasion. I do know it was the USA that invaded Grenada and toppled the Marxist government. Um, you know, I think there was a kind of a counterculture leftist rock group from the 80s, the Fugs, and they had a song, "If you want to be president a very long while, be sure to invade a tiny, tiny isle." And it was about Reagan's invasion of Grenada. That basically, Reagan got on TV and he said, "Oh, there's a communist government on the island of Grenada, and so we're going to overthrow them." And within 8 hours, the USA went to war without it talking to anybody, it was just like out of the blue. Reagan's just like, "All right, we're invading this country." And a socialist government was overthrown. And that was pretty awful. And there were a lot of American leftists who, when Grenada was moving towards socialism, they went there to stand with it. And some of them were killed, some of them were tortured, some of them were taken prisoner. Obviously it was worse for the people of Grenada who were killed in a counter revolution. But also, there were even some like American leftists who'd gone down there in solidarity who got caught up and killed in the fighting. It was awful. All right. Who was behind the assassination of Trotsky? Well, the guy who did it, what was his name? Robert McCurser or whatever. My understanding is that it's just widely acknowledged that the guy who killed Trotsky was working for Stalin. That's my understanding, right? My understanding is that Trotsky's last words were, "He sent you," referring to Stalin. My also understanding is that, Stalin did say that Trotsky needed to die. And the reason that Stalin said that was because World War II was breaking out. And Trotsky did not support, did not support an alliance. He was basically trying to undermine the war effort in the Western capitalist countries. Trotsky said he supported the Soviet Union defending itself from the Nazi invaders. But Trotsky also said that in France, that they shouldn't be defending the homeland from the Nazi invasion. He said, that the German workers and the French workers should lay down their guns. And he attacked the Communist Party of France for calling for defense of the homeland from the Nazis. And in the United States, the Trotskyites were trying to unionize the U.S. Army during World War II. And they were jailed for trying to undermine the war effort. And that Trotsky, there was a fear that Trotsky would use socialist language to undermine the fight against fascism. Do I think it's possible Stalin was assassinated? It's possible. I'd never say never, but I don't believe he was assassinated. He was pretty old at the time. I have heard some talk of the timing of his death. I've heard talk about like how many guards were there, and I'm not saying it's impossible, but I find it, I don't see any solid proof of that. No, and there is a possibility that could have happened, but I think it's a small possibility, right? I think he was just an old man at that point, and people don't live forever. And when he died, the Soviet Union went into mourning, and it was one of the biggest funerals in history. People walked by the casket, and the whole country went into mourning. The whole Soviet Union. It was a big, thing. Stalin was the guy who had taken them from being a poor country to being a superpower, and had led them through World War II. And for a lot of people in the Soviet Union, Stalin was like their father. Stalin was the man who had seen them and led them through so much hardship. He was the voice on the radio. He was the one who had visited their factory and, and shook their hand and congratulated them for working so hard to build up their country. He was the one who'd overseen their country being electrified. He's the one who'd overseen wiping out illiteracy. He's the one who'd built the steel industry. They saw him as this, almost godlike figure who had, there's, if you go watch the Saxton lectures, right? One of the songs that my friend Paul played during the Saxton lectures is the Ballad of Joe Stalin. It's written by Ewan McCool. Ewan McCool is a folk singer, from Britain, and he wrote the Ballad of Joe Stalin, and no one knows what the tune is because there's no recording of it. There's one recording. It's to like a Russian tune we found on the internet. We didn't want to use that. So My friend Paul put it to the Woody Guthrie song, "The World Has Ever Seen." That's what he put it to. And the lyrics seem to work well with that tune. But I mean, the lyrics. I mean, Joe Stalin was a mighty man was he. He led the Soviet people on the road to victory. All through the revolution, he fought at Lenin's side. He made a combination till the day that Lenin died. He said, "Come all you people, let's work with brain and hand." And then one day the Nazis came into the Soviet land. Well, Stalin said, "Come on, me boys," Stalin and drove them out again. I mean, it's really the song is about how basically Stalin carried out economic miracles. I mean, he raised the USSR up from nothing. He defeated the Nazi invaders. I mean, he electrified the country. He wiped out illiteracy. I mean, by the time Stalin died, they were on the brink of inventing space travel. I mean, it's like we don't understand this. And this is so obscure. You think all that Stalin did was kill people. People were all just starving. It's like, no, okay. You can talk about the hardship of the Stalin years and the Gulag stuff. That was awful. Absolutely awful. And every historian agrees there were a lot of people who ended up in gulags who did not belong there. And that's abundantly clear. The Great Terror, they call it Yezhovshchina. That was a nightmare. It's also very clear that, World War II was a very ugly thing. And in order to win World War II, Stalin, was moving people around on the basis of their nationality. And there were a lot of things like it was not pretty what the Soviet Union had to do to win World War II. They lost 27 million people. That's not a small number of people. And so, again, you don't want to pretend Stalin was just Mr. Nice Guy. He was definitely not Mr. Nice Guy. He was definitely not Mr. Nice Guy. Let me put it that way, right? I mean, Stalin literally means man of steel, right? I mean, he was Mr. Tough Guy is what he was. But that said, Stalin presided over life for people in a huge chunk of the world rapidly getting better. Literacy, electrification, full employment, building a modern farm system. I mean, what Stalin did, there's a reason that like W.E.B. Du Bois, the most well-respected African-American scholar in U.S. history, I mean, the founder of Black Studies, and I mean, he loved Stalin. And I've read to you on these streams, and I write in my books, City Builders and Vandals, I quote him about what he said about Stalin. There's a reason that Albert Einstein loved Stalin and praised Stalin so loudly. And people, you just want to gloss over this, but I mean, Stalin really had a huge impact on world history. And I would encourage people to study why that was. Learn about Stalin the man, not because you want to defend everything he ever did, but, look into the leadership qualities. How was it that Stalin was able to mobilize the people as effectively as he did? What made Stalin an effective mass leader? William Z. Foster has a really great essay, Stalin and Mao as Mass Leaders. But if you read Young Stalin by Simon Montefiore, the biography about Stalin before the revolution, you get an image of just a genius politician, somebody who knew how to organize people. He could win people over to his side. He could get people to trust him. He could win people's support. He was a very, very effective mass leader. Right? Stalin was from a little tiny town in Georgia, a small town in Georgia. And his mother saved up everything she had to send him to seminary school. His mother had had a number of miscarriages before he was born. And so she made a promise to God that if God would let her give birth to a son, she would send the son to seminary school. So she saved up all her money and she went around the village and begged other people for money. And she sent him to go study in seminary school. Stalin went to seminary school to learn to be a priest in the Russian Orthodox Church. And he was a teenage rebel. He was a bad boy, and they had a rule at his school. You could only read religious books. And so he went to the little town near the school and he found out that they had a bookstore. And so he smuggled novels into the school, novels and fiction and all kinds of forbidden books. And he made lots of money selling forbidden books to his classmates. Yes, we'll post the letter to Louisiana. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, and he organized this book smuggling ring at his seminary school. He was always getting in trouble for this. He was, it was considered, a rebellious, bad thing to do. But he did it. And eventually he was kicked out of school. And when he was kicked out of school, he had already learned to read and write. And in pre-revolutionary Russia, especially if you were from Georgia, which was a colony, it was an oppressed nation within the Tsarist Empire, knowing how to read and write, especially if you're from a rural village, is a big deal. And so Stalin could read and write. And so he learned to read and write in seminary school. And Stalin, he left seminary school and he started, he discovered Marxism. He became a Bolshevik. And he rose up the ranks of the Bolshevik party because there were two ranks. They joked there were two types of Bolsheviks, right? You had your intellectuals, Lenin, Bukharin, Zinoviev, these people from wealthy backgrounds who studied Marxism and wrote out the strategy in books. And then you had workers, working class people who joined unions, right? And the Bolsheviks led unions. Stalin was both of those. He was from the working class. His father was a bootmaker. He was from a small village. So he was from the working class on the one hand. On the other hand, he was educated. He knew how to read and write. He'd gone to seminary school. And so he could give speeches and he could write, and he had the intellect of an intellectual. He could, he was on the level of Lenin and Bukharin and Zinoviev and all of them. But he was also in touch with the broad masses, with the ordinary people. So he was the perfect combination, right? He was a worker politician. That's what Stalin was. He was a worker politician. He wasn't a professional politician like Bukharin, Zinoviev, and all of them, and Lenin. And he wasn't just a factory floor worker who was living day to day. He was a worker politician. He was a working class person who had become heavily politicized and heavily educated about Marxism. And he was a worker politician. And he was really the ideal. If you read What Is to Be Done by Lenin, it talks about how there's an agitator in every workplace. There's somebody at a workplace who becomes the leader of the workers, is popular with the other workers. And when there's a struggle, they become the leader, the one that the workers turn to for leadership. That was Stalin. And you read about, the strikes that he led among oil workers. And you read about the efforts he made to bring Muslim workers and Christian workers together in their protests against the Tsar and against their conditions. And you get the impression Stalin was just a dynamic organizer, right? He knew how to work with people. He knew he could talk to anybody. So that's what you need to know about Stalin, basically. And again, criticize his leadership all you want, but there are very few people in history who presided over that dramatic of a change. What the Soviet Union was when Stalin became the leader in 1924, and what the Soviet Union was by the time he died in 1954, it's like night and day. It's like night and day. You're talking about, you want to talk about a huge dramatic change. And we Americans have really benefited from Stalin, right? And you can pretend that we haven't, right? You can say, oh, no, that's bullshit. Well, we have definitely benefited from Stalin. In 1934, there was a strike wave in the United States. And that strike wave in 1934, that's the reason Roosevelt created Social Security. And that's the reason that, that all the New Deal stuff happened. And why was that strike wave of 1934 so important? Right? It wasn't the biggest strike wave in history. The biggest strike wave in U.S. history was in 1877, and it didn't win anything. The only thing it led to was the creation of the armories, basically, so they could have a military to more effectively put down strikes. It was much bigger, the railroad workers' strike of 1877. But the strike wave of 1934 in Minneapolis and San Francisco with the dock workers and the Teamsters in Minneapolis and the Toledo light workers in Ohio, and the South Carolina textile workers and the sharecroppers throughout the South, those strikes, they changed the world because they were led by communists, and the USA was in a political crisis in the Great Depression. And on the other side of the world, there was a guy named Stalin who was in charge, and the Soviet Union was booming and having a booming economy. And the ruling class saw three major cities have, prolonged periods of unrest and, workers led by communists battling the National Guard in the streets. And they saw the Soviet Union having a strong economy while the U.S. economy and the British economy and the Western economies were collapsing. They said, okay, we got to hold off revolution. And that's why we have the New Deal in the United States. The reason that Roosevelt went ahead and passed the New Deal was because there were enough capitalists that were afraid of workers' revolution because of what was happening on the other side of the planet. It's because of that. And as Don's ahead of me, Don D and NYC is ahead of me. It was the fact that Stalin pushed the oppression of black people. Langston Hughes, the black revolutionary poet, was a member of the Communist Party. And Stalin emphasized the national question and the idea that African Americans are a group of oppressed people within U.S. borders. And that was unpopular. The story that I've heard is, at one point in the 1930s, the Communist Party had a convention. And in honor of Russia, they hired some Russian ballerinas to perform, right? It's a big convention that goes on for days. And so, that they wanted to have some entertainment. So they hired these Russian ballerinas. And so these Russian ballerinas who were, they were from New York, but they did Russian ballet. They came out on the stage at the Communist Party convention and they saw there were black people in the audience. And they said, "We're leaving. We don't perform for black people." And they left. Awful. But these were counter-revolutionary Russians who'd fled, right? And were ballerinas, and they weren't going to perform for black people. And that, taking a stand against Jim Crow segregation in the 1930s was not a popular thing to do. It was actually illegal in the Jim Crow South. You could be hung for it if you opposed Jim Crow segregation. They used to hang, the lynchings. Some of the lynchings were what they called radical Republicans, were people that had opposed Jim Crow. It was white people who'd opposed Jim Crow. They got hung and lynched too. So when the Communist Party, when it was being formed in the 1920s, said, "We are for the liberation of black people. We support black nationalism. We are for, black people, if they want to, even carving out their own territory as an oppressed, colonized people and having their own territory." That was huge. And it was not a popular stand to take, but, the Communist Party took that stand. And because they took that stand, thank you, Thomas. Thank you very much. Because they took that stand, they achieved real miracles. They, and they mobilized people and did some really amazing things. So, it needs to be said. And that, again, Stalin had a huge impact on the black liberation movement in America. So that must be said. All right, folks, I'm tired. It's a late night. I'm going to cut it off here, but it's always fun. Here we go. New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.